Hi, I'm Everett Gossard with Pentecostal Resources Group, and today my guest is Dr. Chris Paris, and we're going to talk about his latest book, Desperately Seeking Direction, but in the meantime. Dr. Paris comes to us today. He has a PhD in Hebrew Bible from Vanderbilt University. He's a licensed UPCI minister. He currently serves as professor of Old Testament at Urshan Graduate School of Theology. He's written a number of books, including two of the books in the widely acclaimed Apostolic Handbook series, the Handbook on the Pentateuch and the Handbook on the Historical Books. And before that, he wrote and edited portions of the Apostolic Study Bible. But today, we're here to talk about your book, Desperately Seeking Direction, but in the meantime. And my first question is, how did this book come to be?
First of all, great to be with you, Everett, and really enjoy working with Pentecostal Resources Group. In particular, you appreciate your skills as an editor and your friendship. How the book came to be, it has a long history. Back in 1997, I gave a little devotional at a Bible quizzing tournament in Ohio about not just finding the will of God, but proving the will of God from Romans chapter 12. And then in 2006, I created a Bible study series called From the Meantime to the Right Time. And it just seemed like these things ideas had been living under the surface for a long time. I had been trying to figure things out, and I think God gave me the ideas, and then I got to live the life and see the experiences and experience the meantime and experience proving the will of God instead of just finding the will of God. And it all just coalesced and came together at a time in my life where I was on a sabbatical from Urshan, living out in San Diego, and just felt like I need to write and more to get me back in the groove of writing. And this book came about, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, I love the topic. I can think of experiences in my own life of when I was desperately seeking direction. And I remember a conversation you and I had back in those days, well, quite a few years ago now. And you brought to mind this idea of proving the will of God. And I had read the scripture, of course, many times, but I had never thought about what that meant to prove the will of God. How would you expound on that, proving the will of God versus finding the will of God?
Yeah, one of the chapters is called Paradigm Shift, where we go from just finding the will of God to proving the will of God. And we do have seek and you shall find. So there's definitely a finding aspect to it. But I found in my life and in so many other lives, people I've talked about, that they feel like the Lord is sending them in a particular direction, but it's not just point A to point B. It's a long circuitous route, much like the route that Joseph took from Egypt, from the pit to Potiphar's house to the prison, and then to being where God wanted him to be as second in command of Egypt. And so it's this proving process. God puts us on proving ground, and I would say at the same time, we are proving God. We're proving God's faithfulness to us, because it's easy when we first receive that word and we're excited, but then we're going through the meantime desert and we're like, God, are you still here? And so we're proving God and finding that. And I think another part of it is we also run into that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So the book's really trying to deal with those terms. And by perfect, I define that more as complete. God's trying to make us complete. So we're proving to get to that complete stage, not to that flawless stage, but where I need to be. I have all the tools. I have been in the prison. I've been working for Potiphar. Now I have all these other skills that can be used to save the world.
That's an excellent corrective. We do think of that word perfect, and we think of that, spotless, without any error, and finding that somewhat elusive, perfect will of God. I think thinking of it as the complete is excellent, and I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. This book did amazing at North American Youth Congress, where it really had its debut. It was released kind of coinciding with that. When you think of the ideal reader for this book, or maybe even the wider subset of readers, who did you write this book for?
Yeah, initially it was that NAWC audience of youth and hyphen age, and thankfully we sold out of all of the copies there, and that was just wonderful. Appreciate the promotion of the book there. And when we talk about from the meantime to the right time, I had never intended to have the book released at NIYC. It just was the right time. And I would say, well, it just so happened, but we know that there was something more going on behind the scenes there. But it was originally toward that audience. I had been a hyphen leader back when it was just called College and Career, with my friend Joe Blaylock, who dedicated the book to, along with Richard and Nancy Granquist. And so I originally started thinking about that group because I had ministered, I've been a youth pastor, I've been a hyphen pastor. But then I started talking to people about the book, and I had, shall we say, more seasoned individuals who were saying, you know what, I could use that book. And we have a chapter and a focus on calling and career and companionship. And I found that there are a lot of people who may be a little bit older who are thinking about those things. God is leading them into a new calling. I've met people who didn't get the call when they were younger. They're older and they're maybe making a career change, and maybe due to life circumstances they're looking for companionship. And so the advice, while originally intended for that maybe younger audience, is now broadened. And I think we just live in an age where a lot of people are desperately seeking direction, and the principles apply no matter what stage of life we're in.
That's so true. It is timeless principle of that seeking direction. You could be in your 40s, 50s, even 60s and looking for direction. But I do see that applying most to some of the students you work with, especially. They get to a time of graduation. They get to a time where they're reaching the end of their studies at Urshan. And I imagine a student in particular who might come into your office, and the student might say, well, I'm coming to the end of my time, and I really don't know what I'm going to do next. They might come to your office and ask you they might ask for some direction. What advice might you give? Or would you just start with a line of questioning and ask them questions about what they're doing? What would you say?
Well, I think one of the things that I want to do is to make people independent thinkers of trusting in the plan and purpose of God. And I'm always very careful as a professor or anyone advising students to have them make their own decisions. I think that's important. Certainly I would love them to be involved in ministry with me and things like that. But what if God has a different plan for them? So that's one of the interesting things about the book. It doesn't always specifically tell you what to do. In fact, I don't think it ever really specifically tells you do this, do that. It's not one of those self-help books where, if you will follow my 10 steps to success, you're going to get there. It's more the principles and if you're applying them. So I think what I would do is ask them, well, let's look at your life. There's a thread running through your life that's showing where you should be and is leading you in a particular direction. What have you seen that's happening? I found that in my own personal situation that I can trace the route now. Now it's a lot more difficult maybe when you're younger to see the route, what's ahead, but I would ask them, well, what do you like? What are you passionate about? What do you want to do? If you could do anything, what would you do? Sky's the limit. Then I think we can get to the more practical aspects of what they should do. Take these principles to be patient in perseverance, to recognize that, good things will happen. It may not be today or tomorrow, but it is on the horizon.
Coming back to the Bible, which, you got one of your early starts with Bible quizzing, that really in-depth scripture. When you think of this topic, desperately seeking direction, who might be the first character in the Bible that you would think of who would fall under this desperately seeking direction?
I think it's Joseph because, interestingly enough, although he has these dreams and he sees where God is sending him, he has no idea how long it's going to take to get there, what he's going to have to go through, every ordeal, every trial that he'll have to go through. And I liken those dreams and his situations to someone who maybe is in a church service, maybe it's a North American Youth Congress, a general conference, a youth retreat or something, and they felt like they have heard from God and they may have received a calling. And then the real work of proving the will of God begins. And they're going through all of these different circumstances. And that may not always be pleasant. It may be experiences of betrayal like Joseph faced. It may be experiences of success only to get shot down. I mean, Joseph is incredibly successful in Potiphar's house, but God has to take him out of there because Potiphar would have just kept him around forever because he's reaping all the benefits. It's kind of similar to his father Jacob. Laban wanted to keep him around forever. So one of the odd things that happens is successful people, God sometimes has to demote them to promote them. That that is part of proving the will of God. So Joseph was really one of those people, and as I talk about in the book, God gave him these dreams, but he didn't tell him about, here's the scene where you're being sold into slavery in Egypt. Here's the scene in the pit. He didn't see any of that. He saw all the good things. And sometimes that's what we experience. We see all the grandeur, all the wonder. But God has more plans for us in the shadows and to take us to the place where we need to be.
Joseph's an excellent example. I think about Joseph's time in the prison. I just see that as, I can't imagine how he must have felt or what he went through, what went through his mind as he was going through that. Maybe not speaking of Joseph specifically, but thinking about a young person, or maybe a person who's not quite so young in their hyphen age or even their 30s. If a person is proving that will of God, is going through a time where they have an idea, they know, or they have a pretty good idea what they should be doing, but they're not doing that at the moment. There's that time of waiting, that time of, it requires patience. In fact, you have 2 chapters that have the word patience in the title. How do you get through that experience so that you wait well, as person expressed it to me recently, that waiting well? What is the secret, or how would you advise a person who is struggling with that in the in-between time?
Yeah, I think it's patience and perseverance, and I talk in the book about some ways we translate things. Is it patience? Is it perseverance? And I kind of ended up just saying patience and perseverance go together. You have to have both. There's a part of perseverance that is patience, and there's a part of patience that has to be perseverance. And so I connect those 2 things. I think I would tell them, try to be fruitful even in the seasons where you don't feel fruitful. I teach a class at Urshan Graduate School of Theology called Leadership in the Bible. And one of the things we do is talk about 3 of the main crops in Israel, the olive, the fig, and the vine. And in studying about figs produce 2 crops a year. And one is this robust crop that is just super fruitfulness. But there's also another crop that it's not quite, has the flavor, or it's not the big crop, but you harvest that and that will take you through the winter, that will take you through the meantime. And I've found in my life that being fruitful in those situations, taking those figs in that time, that can really work. And this book actually came about as part of that, where it was just persevering. I don't feel like writing now. I don't feel like doing this, but I'm going to do it. And I started writing the book really just to get me back on the writing bicycle, because I felt like I had fallen off, maybe even crashed off of it. I don't know. So I would suggest that when you're in that situation where you don't feel fruitful, find something to do to be fruitful. I'm not saying force it or make it happen, but have that gumption to press forward a little bit just in your own personal life and do something to be fruitful.
Might this book, in one respect, even have been the result of a in the meantime in your own life?
I would say, as you read the part about my testimony, a lot of different meantimes, things that happen. I had an interesting experience many years ago. It's not in the book, but I thought about it after writing the book. I was in a church service, and I was in my hometown on one side of the altar, and on the other side of the altar, there's this guy who's not been serious about God at all. But God was going to use him, and God was calling him to preach in this service. And he ended up pastoring a couple of churches and working in youth ministry, and was an evangelist, did many great things for God. But he would tell you himself at this time in his life, he was just kind of goofing off. And so we have, kind of the apostle or prophet in our areas come to preach, and the prophet lays his Bible on that guy's head, and he's called to preach. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, if this guy has gotten a Ferrari, I'm getting a NASCAR, because God's going to skyrocket me to the top. But it was more like God was saying, no, here's your camel. You get to go through the desert. You have a long road. I mean, I was supposed to go to grad school and do all of these things. It was a meantime, because things were difficult. It was a long way from promise to fulfillment. I see a lot of people, some people in ministry, they seem to immediately have success. That was not the case for me, because God had a totally different plan for me. So part of proving the will of God is also realizing who you are. What is God's plan for my life? I'm thankful for what God did to my friend and for his life, but I also had to know, okay, this is me, and this is what I have to go through. And it's not always going to be pleasant, but God taught me how to survive the desert of the meantime.
Well, there you have it. Dr. Chris Paris, From the NASCAR to the camel. A walk in the desert.
Walk in the desert. Next book title.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You can buy Dr. Paris's new book on PentecostalPublishing.com, Desperately Seeking Direction. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.